Why does Hans Moleman keep showing up at the strangest moments, surviving the most bizarre accidents, and yet no one seems to question it? Today, we're diving deep into The Simpsons to uncover the secrets behind Springfield's most mysterious resident, Hans Moleman. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why this character has puzzled fans for decades and what the creators might be hiding. From being run over by cars to disappearing without explanation, Hans Moleman has become one of The Simpsons' most bizarre mysteries. But who is he really? Why does he seem to cheat death over and over? And is there a bigger meaning behind his strange existence? In this video, we'll uncover the hidden clues, fan theories, and behind-the-scenes secrets that could finally explain Hans Moleman once and for all. When you think about The Simpsons, you probably imagine the chaos of Homer, the mischievousness of Bart, or the sarcastic brilliance of Lisa. But hidden in the background, there's someone far stranger, someone who doesn't quite fit in yet, somehow feels like he's always been there. I'm talking about Hans Moleman, the tiny, wrinkled man with that frail voice and the tendency to appear at the most unexpected and often disastrous moments. But where did this odd little character come from? To understand the mystery of Hans Moleman, we have to go all the way back to his origins, and trust me, things only get weirder the deeper we go. Hans Moleman didn't even start out as Hans Moleman. In fact, when he first appeared in Season 2, he wasn't meant to be a recurring character at all. His first appearance was in the episode Principal Charming, where he was driving a car and accidentally crashed because the sun got in his eyes. At that time, he was simply referred to as Hans Moleman in the credits, a throwaway name for what seemed to be a throwaway character. He was bald, had thick glasses, and looked like the kind of man life had completely chewed up and spit out. The writers thought he was funny enough for a small gag, and that was pretty much it. No one imagined he would become a cult favorite. But here's the strange part. In that debut, he wasn't even called Hans Moleman in the actual show. His driver's license read Ralph Mellish, and according to it, he was only 31 years old. That's right, 31. This was the first bizarre clue that there was something very off about this man. Because let's be real, Hans Moleman doesn't look like someone in his 30s. He looks like he's been alive for at least a century, maybe longer. Fans immediately started speculating. Was this a mistake by the animators, or was this the first hint that Hans Moleman wasn't a normal Springfield citizen at all? As the series went on, Hans Moleman slowly evolved. He went from being this unnamed background character to a man who just kept showing up, always in unfortunate circumstances. And each time, the writers gave him a little more personality, a little more mystery. He got run over by cars, trapped underground, caught in explosions, you name it, it happened to him. And yet he always came back. Almost like Springfield itself couldn't get rid of him no matter how hard it tried. Behind the scenes, the writers have admitted that Hans Moleman became one of those happy accidents. The voice actor, Don Castellaneta, the same guy who voices Homer, gave him this week, trembling voice that made everything he said sound both sad and hilarious. The writers loved it so much that they kept finding ways to bring him back. They even made him the star of one of The Simpsons' most iconic moments, the short film man getting hit by football, which is literally just Hans Moleman getting hit in the groin by a football. It's simple, it's stupid, and yet it became legendary. But here's what makes his origin even stranger. In The Simpsons universe, most characters have at least some kind of backstory. We know about Moe's past, about Grandpa Simpson's history, even about side characters like Apu and Ned Flanders. But Hans Moleman, almost nothing. It's like he was designed to be a mystery from the very start. He lives in Springfield, sure, but we never see his house. He doesn't seem to have a family. He rarely interacts with the main characters except when fate decides to mess with him. It's almost as if he just wanders through life, waiting for the next disaster to strike. Some fans believe this lack of origin was intentional, that the writers wanted him to be this surreal, almost supernatural presence in Springfield. After all, this is a guy who has been buried alive, blown up, crushed, and yet somehow he's always back in the next episode as if nothing happened. Was he meant to be a joke about cartoon immortality? Maybe, but others think there's more to it. And this brings us to one of the strangest details from his earliest appearances. Remember how I said his license claimed he was 31 years old? Well, in later episodes, characters start joking about how old he actually is, with some even calling him ancient. In one episode, Hans himself says, "I was born 100 years too early." So, is he immortal? Is he cursed? Or is this just the writers messing with us? That mystery started way back in his origin, and that's one of the reasons Hans Moleman became such a fascinating character for fans to dissect over the years. When you look at Hans Moleman's track record in The Simpsons, one thing immediately stands out: this guy suffers more accidents than anyone else in Springfield. It's like he was born under a cursed star. Cars hit him, sinkholes swallow him, footballs strike him in the worst possible places, and yet, somehow, he always survives. It has reached the point where fans don't just laugh at Hans Moleman's pain, they expect it. It became a pattern, a rhythm, a running gag that only got funnier the longer the series went on. But here's the strange part. If you watch closely, you start to realize there might be more going on here than just slapstick comedy. Maybe these accidents aren't just random jokes. Maybe they're part of something bigger lurking in the background of The Simpsons. Think about it. Hans Moleman isn't like the other characters in Springfield who have their own quirks or flaws. Homer messes up because he's lazy, Bart causes chaos because he's mischievous, and Mr. Burns is cruel because he's, well, Mr. Burns. But Hans? He's not doing anything wrong. He's not out there asking for trouble. Most of the time, he's just minding his own business, living a quiet, unassuming life, and then bam! Life smacks him in the face, literally. He gets hit by a car, falls into a hole, or gets trapped in some bizarre accident that nobody could have predicted. Take the infamous short film, Man Getting Hit by Football. It's such a simple moment. Hans Moleman stands there. A football comes flying out of nowhere and hits him right where it hurts most. That's it. That's the whole joke. And yet, this tiny gag became one of the most iconic bits in The Simpsons history. Why? Because it perfectly sums up Hans Moleman's entire existence. He doesn't chase drama. It finds him. He's the ultimate victim of fate, the guy who takes life's punches again and again without even knowing why. Over the years, the writers kept finding new ways to torment him, almost like they were competing with themselves to see how far they could push it. At one point, Hans gets buried alive and calmly says, "I'm still alive, but I'm very badly burned." In another, he drives straight into a tanker truck and causes a massive explosion. And then there's the time he got swallowed by the earth itself. Each disaster is so over the top that you think this would be the end of Hans Moleman for good. But no, next episode, there he is, alive and well, as if nothing happened. This is where things start to feel weirdly deliberate. Fans have pointed out that Hans Moleman doesn't just survive these accidents. He comes back without any explanation at all. It's like Springfield exists in some kind of time loop where nothing is permanent, and Hans Moleman is the ultimate proof. People in the town barely react to his injuries anymore, almost as if they've accepted this is just what happens to him. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Hans Moleman's constant suffering is Springfield's way of reminding us that life in this town doesn't follow normal rules. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Some fans think Hans Moleman's accidents are a metaphor for how The Simpsons itself treats its side characters. The main family gets storylines, development, emotional arcs, but the background characters, they exist mostly for punchlines, and Hans Moleman might be the most extreme example of that. He has no control over what happens to him, no real voice in the story. He's just there to be the butt of the joke. And yet, ironically, that made him stand out more than almost any other side character. His pain became his identity, and over time, that identity turned into a kind of mystery. Because at a certain point, you have to ask, how can one man suffer so much and keep coming back? It's almost supernatural. Characters in The Simpsons have died before Bleeding Gums Murphy, Maud Flanders, but Hans Moleman, he's indestructible. He's been in car crashes, explosions, even plane wrecks, and he always walks away. Some fans joke that he's like Kenny from South Park, doomed to die in every episode but cursed to return no matter what. Others think the writers secretly made him immortal as part of the gag, as if Springfield itself refuses to let him go. And then there are the darker theories. Some viewers believe Hans Moleman represents bad luck personified, a living symbol of life's random cruelty. Others take it even further, suggesting he's stuck in some kind of endless purgatory, reliving pain over and over with no escape. It sounds wild, but when you watch how often disaster strikes him compared to everyone else, it really does make you wonder if the writers were hinting at something deeper without ever saying it out loud. When it comes to Hans Moleman, there's one detail that has fascinated fans for decades: the bizarre contradictions about his age and identity. Right from his first appearance, things didn't quite add up. Remember that debut in season 2 where his driver's license said he was 31 years old? That single piece of information threw fans into chaos because, let's be honest, Hans Moleman doesn't just look old, he looks ancient, like someone who's seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. 31? That's younger than Homer, younger than Chief Wiggum, younger than half the town? It made no sense, and the writers knew it. That one little joke planted a seed of mystery that has only grown with every passing season. Because after that moment, the show started dropping strange hints about Hans Moleman's life, each one making things more confusing rather than less. In later episodes, characters casually refer to him as if he's been around forever, like some permanent fixture of Springfield. At one point, Hans himself even says, "I was born 100 years too early," as if he's lived through centuries of disappointment. But the show never clarifies whether he's joking, senile, or telling the literal truth. It leaves the audience dangling in that weird space between comedy and conspiracy, wondering who this man actually is. And then there's the way he looks. Hans Moleman is probably the frailest character in all of The Simpsons. He's hunched over with paper-thin skin, massive glasses that take up half his face, and that quivering voice that sounds like he's on the verge of giving up completely. He looks like someone who's been through not just years of hardship, but entire lifetimes of it. Fans started to wonder, was the 31 years old thing just a joke about how rough life in Springfield can be? Like, this is what happens when you live here too long, you age in dog years. Or was it a subtle hint that Hans Moleman isn't like everyone else, so that maybe time doesn't work the same way for him? Over the years, people have built entire theories about this. Some believe Hans Moleman is immortal, cursed to live through endless suffering without ever escaping it. Others think he might be a time traveler, someone who accidentally got stuck in Springfield and has been trying to survive ever since. There's even a darker theory that Hans Moleman might be dead already, that he is a ghost wandering through Springfield, which would explain why he's constantly injured or killed, but always comes back. It sounds absurd, sure, but so does the idea of one man being crushed, burned, buried, and still showing up at Moe's Tavern the next week like nothing happened. But it's not just his age that makes him mysterious, it's the fact that we know almost nothing about his personal life. Hans Moleman doesn't seem to have a family or friends or even a job that we ever see. He just sort of exists. He drifts through the background of Springfield like he's just part of the scenery rather than a real person. In a show where even minor characters like Disco Stu or Professor Frink have some kind of backstory or personality quirks, Hans Moleman remains completely undefined. It's like the writers intentionally erased any details that might make him feel normal, leaving us with nothing but questions. And yet, despite this lack of information, or maybe because of it, he somehow became one of the most recognizable side characters in the entire series. People quote him, meme him, laugh at his misfortune, but when you really stop to think about him, there's an unsettling emptiness there. Who is Hans Moleman when he's not getting hit by cars or falling into sinkholes? Where does he go when the cameras aren't on him? Why does nobody in Springfield seem to know anything about him? Some episodes tease answers only to make things even stranger. In one scene, Hans Moleman claims he used to be mayor of Springfield for a brief time, but nobody remembers it. In another, he hints at having a romantic past, but it's never explained. It's like he has these flashes of a real life, a history, a story, but the show always cuts away before we can learn anything real. It leaves you wondering if Hans Moleman is even supposed to be a consistent character, or if he's more like a glitch in the system, someone who doesn't follow the normal rules of the Simpsons universe. And that's what keeps fans coming back to him. Because unlike other characters whose lives we can map out where they live, what they do, who they know, Hans Moleman is a blank slate covered in bruises and bad luck. He doesn't fit neatly into the world around him. He exists on the edge of it, half forgotten, half immortal, a man with no clear age, no clear identity, and no clear purpose other than to confuse and intrigue everyone watching. The thing about Hans Moleman is that at some point, fans stopped seeing him as just another side character and started treating him like a puzzle that needed to be solved. Because let's face it, how many times can one man be buried alive, set on fire, and hit by cars before people start asking serious questions? It reached a point where viewers began piecing together every odd clue, every strange line of dialogue, and every impossible survival, trying to figure out whether Hans Moleman was just a running gag, or if the Simpsons had secretly built an entire mystery around him that nobody was paying attention to. One of the most popular theories is that Hans Moleman is immortal. It sounds wild at first, but think about it. Characters in The Simpsons have died before Maud Flanders fell to her death. Dr. Marvin Monroe disappeared for years before the writers randomly brought him back, and Bleeding Gums Murphy's death even became a major plot point. But Hans Moleman? He's been flattened by trucks, set on fire, launched into the air by explosions, and in one episode, he even admits to being buried alive, and yet there he is in the very next scene, alive and well, as if nothing happened. It's like Springfield itself can't get rid of him, no matter how many times fate tries. Some fans even call him the Kenny of The Simpsons, a reference to Kenny from South Park, who dies in nearly every episode only to come back with no explanation. But unlike Kenny, Hans Moleman's immortality is never acknowledged. Another fan theory takes things in a completely different direction, suggesting Hans Moleman might actually be a ghost. According to this idea, Hans died long ago, maybe in some terrible Springfield accident that nobody remembers, and now he wanders the town as a spirit who doesn't even realize he is dead. It would explain why nobody ever questions his constant injuries or miraculous survivals. It would explain why he doesn't seem to age, why he doesn't have a family, why he drifts through Springfield like he's not really part of it. Some fans even point out that he is rarely shown interacting with the main characters in any meaningful way, almost like they can't truly see him. It's a creepy thought, but once you start looking at Hans Moleman through that lens, it actually fits a little too well. Then there's the time loop theory, which might be the strangest of them all. This idea claims that Springfield exists in some kind of eternal reset button, where time doesn't move forward and events don't have lasting consequences. That's why Bart never ages, why Maggie stays a baby forever, and why Hans Moleman keeps coming back no matter what happens to him. He is uncursed or immortal. He is just trapped in the same repeating cycle as everyone else in Springfield, forced to relive the same disasters over and over because time in The Simpsons does unwork the way it does in the real world. The only difference is that Hans Moleman seems to get the worst of it every single time, like he drew the short straw in the universe's script. But not all the theories are dark. Some fans see Hans Moleman as a kind of cosmic joke, a symbol of The Simpsons' unique sense of humor. This is a show that thrives on absurdity. Homer goes to space, Mr. Burns blocks out the sun, Bart sells his soul for $5, and Hans Moleman might just be the writer's way of taking that absurdity to its absolute limit. He's the embodiment of bad luck, the ultimate underdog, the guy who suffers so much it stops being sad and becomes hilarious. Maybe there's no big secret. Maybe Hans Moleman is funny precisely because there's no reason for any of it. Still, the writers themselves haven't helped calm the speculation. Over the years, they've thrown in little moments that feel like clues but never lead anywhere. Like the time Hans Moleman claimed he was once mayor of Springfield, or when he said he used to be a successful actor before tragedy struck. These lines come out of nowhere, delivered in that frail, defeated voice, and then the show just moves on like nothing happened. It's almost like the writers enjoy teasing the audience, giving us tiny glimpses of a backstory they have no intention of ever fully revealing. And that's probably why fans keep digging. Because the more you watch Hans Moleman, the more you realize how little you actually know about him. He doesn't fit neatly into the world of The Simpsons. He exists on the fringes, caught between comedy and tragedy, between background character and cosmic mystery. And whether he's immortal, a ghost, a victim of a time loop, or just the unluckiest man in television history, One thing is certain: Hans Moleman has become so much more than just a running gag. He's a question mark the show has never answered, a mystery hiding in plain sight. And for a character who started out as nothing more than a one-off joke, that might be the strangest thing of all. If there's one thing about The Simpsons that keeps fans hooked after all these years, it's that the writers never do anything by accident. Every background gag, every weird line of dialogue, every blink and you'll miss it detail has some thought behind it. And when it comes to Hans Moleman, the mystery deepens even more when you start looking at what the creators themselves have said about him, or rather, what they haven't said. Because despite being one of the most peculiar characters in Springfield, Hans Moleman is shrouded in silence when it comes to his origins. It's like the writers intentionally built this puzzle and then locked the answer in a vault just to watch fans drive themselves crazy over it. Let's go back to the beginning for a second. When Hans Moleman first appeared in Season 2, he wasn't even supposed to be a recurring character. The original drawing was this odd, mole-like man with thick glasses, a wrinkled face, and that iconic defeated expression, and the writers thought he'd be funny for a quick one-off gag. Don Castellaneta, the same genius who voices Homer, gave him that weak, trembling voice almost as a joke, thinking it would be perfect for a guy who looks like life has completely beaten him down. Nobody expected the character to stick. Nobody expected him to become the center of fan theories decades later. He was supposed to be a quick laugh and nothing more, but then something happened. Every time Hans Moleman showed up, people laughed harder. There was something about him, this tiny, fragile man suffering the worst possible luck with that monotone voice, calmly accepting it all, that just worked. The writers realized they had accidentally stumbled on comedic gold. And rather than explain him, rather than give him a backstory or personality like so many other side characters, they leaned into the mystery. Hans Moleman kept popping up in random places, surviving increasingly ridiculous disasters, and the less we knew about him, the funnier he became. Over the years, a few of the writers have dropped small hints about Hans Moleman in interviews, but they never give anything concrete away. Some have admitted they love using him because he's the perfect background victim. If something horrible needs to happen to someone in Springfield, it's always funnier if it happens to Hans Moleman. A car accident, a falling anvil, a random explosion, Hans Moleman is the guy you can count on to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It became a running joke in the writer's room to see just how far they could push it. Could they kill him off in one episode and bring him back in the next with no explanation? Absolutely. Could they give him a tragic line like "I was born 100 years too early" and never follow up on it? Definitely. The chaos surrounding Hans Moleman isn't an accident, it's the whole point. But here's the really interesting part. Some former writers have admitted that they intentionally left certain things about Hans Moleman vague because they knew fans would fill in the gaps themselves. The less information you give about a character, the more people start inventing their own theories. That's exactly what happened here. If Hans Moleman had been given a normal backstory, a job, a family, an address, he would have just been another Springfield resident like Kirk Van Houten or Gil Gunderson. Instead, by keeping him a blank slate, the writers turned him into a mystery box. Every weird clue, every impossible survival, every contradictory detail about his age or past just made fans more obsessed with figuring him out. There are even rumors among the Simpsons staff that some episodes intentionally added bizarre details about Hans Moleman just to mess with the audience. Like the time he claims to be only 31 years old despite looking like he's been alive since the Civil War, or when he casually mentions things like having once been mayor or being buried alive without ever explaining how or why. These little lines don't go anywhere. They're never explained in later episodes. And that's exactly the point. The writers know fans will dissect every second of the show looking for answers that were never meant to exist in the first place. And maybe that's what makes Hans Moleman so fascinating behind the scenes. He's the result of writers experimenting with background humor and discovering something bigger than they expected. They created a character who somehow became iconic without ever having a real story. A character who exists entirely on the edges of the show but has sparked more theories than almost anyone else. Some writers have even admitted that Hans Moleman became a kind of in-joke among the staff, a blank canvas they could project anything onto. One episode, he's a victim. The next, he's a mayor. The next, he's hinting at immortality. And through it all, he never changes. He never demands answers. He just shuffles along, accident after accident, as if he knows more than he's letting on, but doesn't feel like sharing it with the rest of us. The fascinating thing about Hans Moleman is that for a character who was never supposed to matter, he somehow ended up leaving one of the biggest cultural footprints in The Simpsons history. Think about it. This isn't Homer or Bart or Mr. Burns, or even a recurring character like Ned Flanders who actually gets storylines and character arcs. Hans Moleman doesn't have any of that. He barely has dialogue. He doesn't even have a consistent life or history we can point to. And yet, decades after his first appearance, people still talk about him, quote him, turn him into memes, and debate his existence like he's some kind of Springfield urban legend. Part of his legacy comes from the fact that Hans Moleman somehow became the ultimate underdog in a show already filled with losers and misfits. Springfield is a town of people whose lives are constantly falling apart, but nobody embodies failure quite like Hans Moleman. He is life's punching bag, a man who can't go 5 minutes without disaster striking, and yet he keeps going. There's something weirdly inspirational about that, even if the show plays it entirely for laughs. No matter how many cars hit him, no matter how many sinkholes swallow him, no matter how many explosions send him flying through the air, Hans Moleman always comes back. He survives everything, and because of that, he's become this strange symbol of resilience wrapped in tragedy, someone who suffers endlessly but never truly disappears. Fans picked up on this early. The man getting hit by a football clip from the episode, "A Star Is Burns," is probably the single most iconic Hans Moleman moment in the entire series. It's so simple, just a short film of him getting hit where it hurts most, and yet it became legendary. People quote it, share it online, reference it in other shows, even decades later. It turned Hans Moleman into a meme before memes were even really a thing. That tiny moment of pain and humiliation somehow captured everything people love about him. The absurdity, the dark humor, the way he takes life's worst moments with this weird, resigned calmness like he expected it all along. But it goes beyond that one clip. Over time, Hans Moleman became a kind of cult hero among the Simpsons fan base. There are entire threads, fan pages, and even video essays dedicated just to him. People analyze his appearances like detectives searching for clues, debating theories about his true nature and purpose in the show. When it comes to mysteries, few are as enduring or as endlessly fascinating as the one surrounding Hans Moleman. Who is he? Where did he come from? And how in the world is he still alive? These are the kinds of questions that have kept fans guessing for decades. Welcome to my channel. It's time to look at the Hans Moleman mystery, aka the most perplexing character in The Simpsons. When we first meet him in the episode, Bart the General, Hans Moleman is introduced as an average working stiff lowly Springfield nuclear power plant employee whose main claim to fame is that he was once briefly engaged to Principal Skinner. But before long, his true nature begins to reveal itself. He survives a plane crash unscathed. He seems completely unfazed by the plant's meltdown. And when Homer accidentally kills him with a forklift, he just shrugs it off like it's no big deal. In fact, he doesn't even seem to be a big deal. His last name isn't even known, which prompted Matt Groening to say, "I don't know what his last name is. I probably should figure that out." Considering that this was set in 1992, I think it's safe to say that we shouldn't hold our breath waiting for an answer. So just what is going on here? Well, the truth is there is no single answer that can do justice to the myriad of mysteries surrounding this man. There are many layers to peel back, but let's try anyway, starting with pop culture phenomenon. Let's face it, Hans Moleman wasn't exactly destined for superstardom. After all, he's a background character who often doesn't even appear in the opening credits. But despite his humble beginnings, he's gone on to become one of the most recognizable faces of Springfield, thanks in large part to a handful of iconic t-shirts that have turned him into a merchandise icon. From slightly used cars to nuclear power is fun, these shirts have helped keep his name alive long after he's appeared on screen. Of course, he's also something of a meme unto himself, with countless Reddit threads and Tumblr posts dedicated to celebrating his image and general awfulness. There's even a whole community of artists who've taken it upon themselves to draw him over and over again. In short, he's basically a walking, talking piece of fan art. But what makes this particularly interesting is that none of this happened organically. Every single instance of Hans Moleman-related fan art is a direct result of someone sitting down and saying, you know what? I want to draw Hans Moleman today. In other words, he's only famous because people have chosen to make him famous. And that's a pretty meta concept for a show that's already self-aware to the point of absurdity. But hey, if you're gonna choose one background character to blow up into superstar status, why not Hans Moleman? He certainly got the right stuff to be Springfield's very own pop culture icon. But pop culture is only one part of the equation. After all, any number of background characters could have been elevated to Moleman status if the writers had simply decided to focus on them. But as lovable and quotable as he is, it's hard to argue that Hans Moleman is more than a caricature of an awful person. So what makes him so memorable in terms of character? Well, the answer might just be that he's unforgettable because he was never meant to be remembered in the first place. After all, he's nothing more than a gag, a running bit that the writers didn't feel the need to invest too much time or energy into. And that lack of investment has only added to his mystique, leaving us to wonder what else we don't know about him. Like, where did he even come from? What's his deal? And will we ever find out? The latter question might be the most important one, since it's possible that the writers have actually given us clues as to how we should interpret him. Take, for example, the fact that he's often depicted as being lucky, like when he wins $10,000 on The Price is Right, only to turn around and lose it all on a scratch ticket. On the surface, this seems like a throwaway gag, but it could also be read as a metaphor for the fan's own relationship with the character. Just as Moleman won and lost his money without doing anything particularly special or extraordinary, so too have fans won and lost their interest in the character over the years. They've invested time and energy into making him popular, only to see that popularity wane as quickly as it came. Whether they know it or not, the fans have essentially created a kind of mythology around Hans Moleman, a mythology that's as compelling as any official backstory could ever hope to be. Some believe he's a cosmic joke, a punchline to a reality that doesn't care about human suffering. Others see him as a tragic figure, a pawn in a game played by forces beyond his control. Still, others believe he might be immortal, doomed to wander the earth for eternity, forever seeking answers to questions that will never be asked. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Hans Moleman is meant to be the ultimate mystery, a reminder that some things are best left unknown. After all, what would happen if we did find out everything there is to know about him? The fun would go away, the mystery would disappear, and we'd be left with just another ordinary character in an already overstuffed fictional town. But as long as we keep him around, as long as we keep asking questions and searching for answers, Hans Moleman will continue to endure as Springfield's walking question mark, its ultimate mystery. And maybe that's why he keeps getting invited to all those parties. This has been my channel. And until next time, remember, the greatest mysteries aren't always the ones that keep us up at night. Sometimes they're the ones that keep us laughing